You know, somewhere on Earth somewhere, somebody probably spent most of their adult life learning how to build this thing. Well, I've spent most of the last 5 minutes learning how to use this expanding laser torch to take it apart. Hey guys, I'm Morphologist, and this is Hardspace Shipbreaker. It's the latest game brought to us by the same people who made the RTS game Homeworld. And they reached out to me directly to ask me whether or not I'd like to do a sponsored video on their new title, which took me about as long as it took me to learn how to use the laser cutting tool to decide yes, because I was already a huge fan of their last Homeworld installment, Deserts of Karak. But I didn't actually agree to doing it until I made sure that they were cool with me expressing my own opinion, even if it was negative. So I want to give a huge thanks and shout out to Blackbird Interactive for being cool with me doing things my own way. So then in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to give you guys an introduction to what Shipbreaker is. We'll go over exactly how it plays, and then at the end we'll wrap up with my impression as well as the good and the bad. If you do decide to get it though, make sure you use the link in the description of this video, which will take you to the Steam page where it's available right now on early access for PC. So step out into the void with me, Shipbreaker, and don't cut the wrong pipe. In the time of Shipbreaker, our solar system has been industrialized, and the Earth that we know and love today is long gone. Replacing it is an overpopulated, miserable trash pile that its unfortunate inhabitants will go to any lengths to escape. Luckily for us, a position in the Link salvage yards just opened up in low Earth orbit, and we've been selected out of a pool of over 100 million applicants to join the ranks of shipbreakers. But there's a bit of a catch. The contract we had to sign to get up out of the gravity well, it's not exactly favorable for us. In fact, we're actually in quite a bit of debt for all of the equipment we're gonna have to use. It's a funny way of making us into a bit of an indentured servant, isn't it? And that's not even the worst of it. This job is notoriously dangerous. In fact, the last guy who had our position, well, let's just say he had an early retirement. But what exactly are we going to be doing up here? What exactly is breaking a ship? Well, you're kind of a reverse engineer, if you will. You're tasked with cutting apart old ships that have fallen into disuse that have been acquired by the Lynx Corporation. You'll take them into your salvage bay and rip them apart piece by piece, sorting them into their proper places for different types of salvage. But hiding beneath every panel that you take apart is a story waiting to be discovered, if you're willing to look for it. Now, being a shipbreaker isn't as easy as it sounds. It's not a simple matter of just cutting off pieces and throwing them into the incinerator. You're gonna get yourself a work order every shift you take, and in that work order are a number of items that you need to get out of the ship intact in order to fulfill your obligation to the Link Salvage Corporation. So cutting things off willy-nilly is likely to decompress the ship, causing an explosion, or worse, making the reactor go critical, and then pretty much half your ship is gone. To get the job done, you've got two major tools. You've got your split saw or laser cutter, as well as your tether tool. Now the standard cutter, the Stinger's good for getting in tight places so you don't accidentally cut something that you don't want, like a valuable item or an explosive tank. But personally, I find the split saw to be way more fun, especially with this voxel-based cutting system where you can just cut panels any which way you like to start removing pieces, which can be a lot of fun, but also pretty dangerous if you're not careful with where the lasers are pointed. I've blown myself up or the ship up a few times by just using it carelessly. Now after you've cut off the items you want to salvage from the ship, you're going to want to use the tether tool to throw them in one of three possible places. Either the processor, the furnace, or onto the barge. Simply looking at an item like this structural element tells you where it's supposed to go. And again, here with this nacelle, it's telling me it wants to go onto the barge. The tether tool also has the ability to tether items together or to tether items to, say, one of the processors to make the job just a little bit faster and easier for you. I found myself using this ability quite a bit to save myself some time. Sometimes though, some items are directly removable from the ship with the tether tool, as long as you're gentle. And you've got to have a bit of a delicate hand when you're doing salvaging, because if you bang things up against walls, you'll reduce their durability and eventually they'll become as useless as scrap. Now, since every ship is a bit different and you need to know exactly where to cut to make things come apart easily, you can use your scanner to figure out where the weak spots are, because not all items are cuttable by the standard cutter. But one of the most dangerous things you're going to deal with when you're salvaging are pressurized environments. Just cutting off a panel in a ship, if it's pressurized, will cause an explosion, causing you to lose half the ship. So it's best to figure out what the best option is for decompressing it before you start taking things apart. There's also a second really good reason why you don't want to blow up a ship by accident, and that's because occasionally it'll still have some cargo on board that you can salvage for some extra money. Some of those items might even be usable, like health kits, oxygen, refueling kits, and sometimes, if you're lucky, you'll find yourself a data pad which will have a bit of a story to it. Tell you a bit about the ship that you're pulling apart, and maybe even link up to a bigger story further on. But don't spend too long looking around on the inside of a ship. Fulfilling your work order has a time limit. Each shift only lasts about 15 minutes, and when you add in the time you're going to have to spend going back to the hab to pick up more oxygen, more fuel for your suit, and more tethers, and you'll find that it's best to be as efficient as possible with your time and deconstruction so that you spend as little effort as possible for the most amount of return. And while you can return back to the salvage the next day if you're not able to finish in the first, remember that every day costs you extra money on your loan to the Lynx Corporation. And so if the remaining salvage is worth less than a single workday's payment, then, well, you might find yourself in the red for that day, and that's no good when you've got a debt of around $1 billion to begin with. But if you do the job right at the end of a shift, you'll find yourself back at the hab with a profit and a little bit closer to freeing yourself from this obligation. Occasionally though, you'll be rewarded with an upgrade. You'll get a better license if you keep working hard and do a good job, and you'll also earn yourself some more upgrade points that you can use to make your suit, cutter, or tether tools all a lot better than they were when you started. This allows you to work your way up to working on bigger and better ships that'll bring in more profit for the time you put in. So that's what it's all about, but what was the experience actually like? What were the good parts, and what were maybe the not so good parts? That's what we're going to go into next. Now, to be clear here, I am not doing a review necessarily. I've only had my hands on this game for about 6 or 7 hours of playtime, and so I want to play a bit more of it before I do something like that. But I do have a pretty solid impression of it, I think, that I can convey to you here. Now, let's start with the not so great. Now, these are really nitpicking because I had a great experience, but they may be a bit of an issue for some. Now, they recommend that you use a gamepad, like an Xbox One remote, for example, to enjoy the game to the fullest extent. I have one, but I imagine that many people who watch my channel don't. Luckily though, the key bindings are very similar to what you find in Star Citizen or Space Engineers. So for those of you who've played those titles before, you'll find yourself right at home, with one pretty big caveat. And this isn't necessarily a negative, it's just sort of a reality of the way they've designed the game. It doesn't have a coupled or decoupled mode, and so you're always floating around and on the move unless you hit the space brakes. Now personally, I don't mind this design choice because I think it adds to the challenge and realism of being in a zero-G environment. But initially, it will take some getting used to. Now the good news is though that using a gamepad does actually enhance the experience. It's got some force feedback to it, so you get a bit of a feel for what you're doing, and moving around in the zero-G environment seems to lend itself to using something like joysticks or thumbsticks on a gamepad. So I think that it was an interesting and good idea perhaps to have that option, but that recommendation might initially put some people off. The other small issue I have isn't really even an issue, it's more of like a personal preference. I have been spoiled by Star Citizen's graphics, and so getting into this game seems a little bit strange to me. But if you've played any of the Homeworld series games, you'll see the DNA in these ships. These have that tone and look, and I think a lot of people will really like that about this, and probably won't care at all about its somewhat stylized graphics. Luckily, after a while, it really grew on me and I no longer noticed it anymore. I think it's just because I was playing Star Citizen and then went straight into this game that I saw such a big contrast. The elephant in the room, though, is that this is an early access game, and so some people might not want to get into it yet because of that reason. There's been a lot of bad experiences with early access games in the past, and there have been some more famous examples of ones that just stopped development halfway through. Luckily, this is a very reputable studio that's produced a number of very well-known titles, and so I've been a bit more willing to trust them than maybe others would be. And well, if you know my channel, you know that I cover Star Citizen and Space Engineers, which have never been known to be a bug-free experience. That being said, I didn't really encounter any bugs playing, though I did have 2 hard crashes to desktop in the 7 hours that I played, which for an early access game isn't bad at all. No bugs to report is impressive. Now let's talk about the good, because there's a heck of a lot more good to this than there is bad. Let's start with the movement mechanics. The movement feels really good. I've played 2 games before that have had a very similar movement, and so once I got used to it, I felt right at home. I'm used to a 0G environment. The mechanics, as in the tools that we're given, are also really fantastic. The Newtonian physics adds to the experience, and being able to tether things together and push them around and have them bump into each other makes it really feel like you're there, even if the graphics are very stylized. And speaking of the style, I really like the gritty feel to it, and even the music. Not the music you're hearing playing in the background because I was concerned about copyright strikes, but the music that you hear in the game is really fitting for the experience. It's very similar to what you're hearing right now. Kind of a bluesy, folksy feeling that is actually affected by the environment. For example, if an object hits your helmet and damages it, it'll switch to a different station, and the character will hit the helmet to switch it back to the correct one that he or she wants to listen to, which I found to be a really nice little touch. Now, the gameplay and concept as a whole I found to be incredibly entertaining, and it soaked up more hours than I expected to get this video. I had to struggle with myself to not go back and get more footage. I was inventing reasons to record more instead of doing this video because I was just having so much fun, but I have a deadline, I have to get this done, so unfortunately I gotta wait until this is out to play more. And I can't wait to. I might even stream it, speaking of which. The other thing I loved was the story that they're trying to add into each ship. Those data pads that you can find add something to the experience, I think, because it makes you feel a bit more immersed in the world. I also like that they're voicing a lot of the things that you find. So all the data pads that I've found have been voiced by some voice actor, and the guy who's giving you instructions every so often is also really well voice acted. Now, this is the part that I can't really tell you too much about because I haven't experienced all of the game yet. It does look like there's some story that you can find that connects together, but I've not gotten far enough to figure out what that is or to even be able to confirm that that's the case. But it's also early access, remember, and so there are certainly features and ideas that have not yet been implemented. While it's a bug-free experience as far as I can tell, it just might not be complete in the way they envision it. And although I reached out for questions and comments from them, I wasn't able to get back any response in the time that I had because, well, they're busy with the launch of the game, which is completely understandable. So if I find out more information about that later, I'll be sure to post it on my community tab or in a follow-up video. The stylistic choice also helps a bit with performance, I imagine. Because it's not at Star Citizen levels of graphics, it ran at huge frame rates for me. Now, granted, I've got a pretty high-end system, but I imagine that most people are going to be able to run this even if their system is several years old, which is good news for a lot of people waiting for this to come out. You don't need the latest and greatest everything to enjoy it. As I know some of you are going to be wondering, this is not a multiplayer game at the moment, or even a co-op experience. It's currently single player only, and I don't know if they have any plans to make it any more than that. I did contact them with questions regarding that, but like I said, I wasn't able to get a response in time for the video. So overall, guys, I am really excited about this game. It was a lot of fun to play, and I had no idea that salvaging could be so fun. I hope that Star Citizen can learn something from this for when they implement salvaging, because I think that this is how you can do it, and make it fun. I'm also really looking forward to what sort of story they're going to come up with this game, because if Deserts of Karak and the other Homeworld series are any indication, these guys know how to tell a compelling story, and I want to see that in this game if that's possible. Hardspace Shipbreaker is available on Steam for $19.99 in early access. If you want to get the game, click on the link in the description of the video, and I really hoped that you enjoyed this video and found it informative. And if you did, you know what to do. And if you want to share what your experience has been so far with Shipbreaker, you can leave a comment down below or join our community on Discord, which will also be in the description. So thanks for watching, Shipbreakers. I'll see you out there in the yard.